Welcome to the official YouTube channel for the Colin Cowherd podcast. Go on, hit the subscribe button. There it is, so you don't miss any of our football content this season. It has been, if I might say, fantastic. The Bears are a fascinating topic. So they lost 38-13, and it was the worst first half any team has played in the NFL this year. It bordered on like Carolina and their offense last year. So at half, they had 12 yards and a first down. But what was interesting to me is generally you get an interim head coach bump. They didn't even get that. It was their worst performance with an interim coach. Total disarray as a franchise. 4 yards in the first half. Fewest by a Bears team since 1991. So they're just running through coaches and they're getting no bounce. So my question to you as we start with the Bears and then pivot to the Niners, who have to win Thursday or the season's over, is – to me, you need a culture changer. You not just a football coach. That's why Ben Johnson's not the answer. You have to come in. Somebody's going to come in and kick ass. I think you have to swing big. You have to go big. Harbaugh should have been it last year. Who are we putting front and center in the coaching search? Because you and I would both acknowledge we don't love the owner. We don't. Kevin Warren's not a strong president if you ask people around the league. The front office, Ryan Poles, I think there are moments I like him. Coaching staff's in disarray. Players today indicated they don't trust this staff. Where do you go for a coach?
Well, normally with interim coaches, really quick, Colin, you get a bump because you mess with the staff. They had already done that when they fired Waldron and made the interim head coach the offensive coordinator. So he actually got, in a weird way, diminished because he had to have more stuff on his plate. And clearly the offense was a joke in the first half. To me, Vrabel makes a lot of sense here.
Yes.
Like, they need one thing when you watch Dan Campbell, when you took over the Lions, it was a job where you go, you can't do this, man. It ain't going to work. This is not going to happen here. And he basically said, screw you. It sure as hell is. And he had that type personality. Now,
and they have poor ownership too. Like the Bears, they have below average ownership.
I would say the Bears have a more glamorous franchise and city than the Lions. They're really not that. They're much closer together than they are close to the Vikings and the Packers. Right?
That's right.
So you need to get a guy who comes in. But this is the problem, Colin. It gets back to Kevin Warren. That press conference he gave after they fired Eberflus, Ryan Poles, the GM, was riding shotgun. Well, why does every president, like I'm sure Kevin Warren's making seven figures. He was hired to build the stadium, which is an extremely important job. But no one really cares about that. Like you don't give press conferences for selling PSLs or getting the naming rights deal for $400 million, even though it's a really big deal to the business. In the business we're all in, no one talks about that. Where do you get credit? When you're around the football team. And I think football people get very, very uncomfortable when a guy like him is around when coaches are getting fired, or if you were winning, he'd be right there. But when you lose, like today in the first half, all I could think about is like Kevin Warren's probably slithering out in his seat, right? I don't want to sit next to Poles or, this new interim coach. Like this is not my problem. But if things go well, they want them. Look at the 49ers are a good example. It's John and Kyle. And anything that happens is strictly on them. And they got an issue, they go right to Jed. And it's a streamlined process. And that's the way with every good organization. If Les and Sean McVay need something, they can go to the Kroenke. Now, they work with the president and you have good relationships, but it feels like to have a coach fired and have him lead the press conference is one of the more glaring things I've seen in recent memory. Shouldn't Ryan Poles be giving this press conference?
Yes.
And I heard from a bunch of people in the league, all these candidates see that. And that's where you get a guy like Vrabel that goes, maybe I'll figure out and I can fake it for a year. And then once I start winning, I will take over. But that's a turnoff to a lot of people. And the other thing is, and listen, and I'm guilty of this. I gave Caleb credit the last, I would say 3 or 4 weeks. He has made some high-end plays. And the physical skills are undeniable.
Yeah.
But is he a good player? Right? Because even last week against Detroit or on Thanksgiving, they were getting their ass kicked in the first half, down 16-0.
Yeah.
They have a lot. They scored 17 points in the fourth quarter against Minnesota. They have a lot of points when the game's kind of out of hand and they've come storm. That's why when the Niners were up like 30-6, I'm like, get ready. The Bears are going to score a couple touchdowns right now. It's when they do their work. So listen, he's very talented, but that franchise has a lot of issues. And He's part of that. It's a team effort. And that's where Vrabel, I'm not as dependent on my quarterback. I'm going to build the team. I'm going to build the culture, the vision. Ben Johnson, a lot of guys, for every McVay and Kyle and LaFleur, we have seen countless offensive coordinators flop. I would not be in the business of first-time head coaches. I think that's too risky given their situation.
Well, look at the coaches who have succeeded taking over shipwrecks. Harbaugh with the Chargers, a talented mess. With Brandon Staley, it was a talented mess.
He did it with the Niners too, same situation.
Okay.
Back in the day.
Okay. Culture builder. Dan Campbell, he's not a schematic genius. He's a culture builder. So when you look at bad franchise, D'Amico Ryans is another guy, good-looking, kind of stoic, intense. McVay, Rams were an absolute mess.
Joke.
McVay, good with schemes, but if you ask him, it's his presence, his ability to own the locker room. When you have a bad franchise or a franchise that's turbulent or in disarray, McVay to the Rams, Dan Campbell, Jim Harbaugh twice, it's not the schematic geniuses. You got to change the culture. So Vrabel has the physical element, which Dan Campbell and Harbaugh have. They're kind of physically intimidating. Mike Tomlin, I would say, is a culture coach, right? Jimmy Johnson had that. Jimmy was a personnel and culture changer. Some guy, Shanahan's about schematics. I think Matt LaFleur can do both, but I think Matt's schematics are really good. I mean, he really breaks down Jordan and then builds him back up. Yeah. But I think Chicago's only choice. Ben Johnson, I don't think he has the personality, the gravitas to do it. I don't think a Cliff Kingsbury, those type of guys, they're not built for Chicago. It's like if you just think about a family. Let's say a family's in disarray, and you're kind of like, what father figure, what parent could save a family that was in disarray? It wouldn't have to be the smartest or the most experienced. It would be an ass kicker. Somebody that came in, put their arms around the kids, and we are changing the environment. That's all football teams are. It's just young guys, it's family, it's young coaches. So I think we both agree. I think Vrabel and by the way, unlike Belichick, doesn't have to dominate personnel. He's not going to be bitter if he doesn't dominate personnel.
One thing about Dan Campbell and Jim Harbaugh used as examples, they're former players. So they have a little bit of, I think cockiness is probably the wrong way to describe it, but a willingness to be pretty, I would say, self-confident in their own beliefs because they've done it as a player. And I think their physical presence, and McVay, let's face it, kind of feels like he played in the NFL for 5 years as a slot receiver, right? Yeah, it's the same with Tomlin. Like, yeah, but he played in the NFL if you didn't know any better. And that's where, the Ben Johnsons, the LaFleurs, the Kyles, they are scheme driven. Yes. And it took Kyle a couple years to build up. This is a different element, right? When you're building, look at Lincoln. If you handed Lincoln Riley a team with a bunch of good players, I bet the team would be good. Yeah. But if you got to start from scratch, it gets a little more difficult. Where Nick Saban, bring it on. He lives for that moment. Yeah. And that's where I think the Bears have to be very, very careful. And anytime you have Kevin Warren's, just look at his resume. It's all business stuff. He's going to have such a heavy hand in this. It's that report last week that Jim Harbaugh would have been interested in the job. Of course he would have been. But if Kevin Warren would not want no part of him, why? Because he would suck all the energy out of the room and get all the credit. Even though that's what always has driven me crazy about football institutions. In any other business, all you care about is like, hey, bring this guy on. We will make more money. We will have more success. It'll be good for everybody. Where in football, it's like, he probably is the best option, but it'll diminish my role. Even though I'll make the same amount of money, I won't get the credit, so we're not going to go down that road. Look at Atlanta. They are falling apart. And listen, Raheem was a legit candidate, but they wanted no part of Belichick. Why? Because those people in the building knew that they were going to get neutered. And you're watching them now, you're like, they are in a free fall.
Yeah. Yeah. Thursday Night Football is on. It's only on Prime Video. Best season yet, packed with big rivalries and even bigger stars. Al Michaels, Kirk Herbstreit, Kaylee Hartung every week.